Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. With no rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And welcome to the Guaranteed Rate Bowl preview, where we may have found the floor, but we got a bowl game left. And bowl games are always exciting because you get to see who is going to step up for your given team. Plus, you get to play a team that you're not used to seeing at all, pretty much. Almost always, unless you're Colorado and BYU getting a third place game for the Big 12. But before we get into previewing the Guaranteed Rate Bowl up against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, we do want to thank the sponsor of the show. That is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the merch store. Supporters link will be dead by the time this episode is released. So, but this isn't really where we wanted to end up. But it's better than the Liberty Bowl. And since it's not the Liberty Bowl, we're going to do a preview on it. So this Rutgers team, obviously coming out of the Big Ten, ended up their season at 7-5, finishing 9th in the Big Ten. They really just had a massive skid in the middle of their season. And they beat some fine, not good teams. Ended up beating Virginia Tech, Washington by 3, Minnesota, Maryland, and Michigan State, all of which are just kind of okay. But their losing skid came in the middle of the season up against Nebraska in Lincoln. You lose by 7 there. That's fine. And then you get absolutely just blasted by a Wisconsin team that did not make a bowl game this year, 42-7 in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And then losing to UCLA and then USC back-to-back, one of which was at home. UCLA, I don't think, made a bowl game either. No, they didn't. So you look at their schedule, and they didn't play any top 25 teams with the exception of Illinois, who they lost to at home. So they don't really have a marquee victory on their schedule for the season. And I'm just going to get this comp out of the way. Connor, you and I talked about this a little bit before, and you can give your specific team comp to this, but the TLDR, which please do listen to the remainder of this episode for your sake, but definitely not for ours. But this is a Rutgers team that is surviving off of the back of a really good running back, a spread power scheme, and the best special teams in the country. Now, Connor, does that sound familiar?
Yeah, this is a comparison that you started with, and I think that I kind of agree with it to a certain degree, and it's kind of like an early to mid-2000s K-State team, where the special teams are elite, and they're carried on offense by a running back, Darren Sproles, and otherwise, I'm starting to, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm starting to feel like this might actually be more of like a 2009, 2010 K-State team. I think that might actually fit them better, like a Daniel Thomas leading them, fantastic special teams. Raphael Guidry was blocked 5 kicks in his career. That's about it, but he was really good at that. But I think they've kind of fit that bill. Actually, I should have brought that up before the episode, but it literally just clicked in my head at this exact moment. And I'm thinking this is like a 2010-ish K-State team, to a T almost. Have some struggles defensively, have some struggles offensively, but they have a bell cow running back that does a ton for them. And their special teams can really even the playing field in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they're a team that very much sort of wins in the margins, is the coach speak way of saying it, which is to say they don't get penalized a lot. They don't turn the ball over a lot. And even though they don't turn the other team over a lot, they're going to get a lot of plus field position by virtue of their special teams, which now that we've talked about them more generally, Connor, you can talk about just their offensive numbers to begin here.
Yeah, so their raw numbers, they're converting about 43% of their third down opportunities. That's a bit above average, but they're just all right in the red zone. 82% scoring, 65% touchdown rate on 57 attempts in that area. And in yards per game, they're about average as well, 381 yards per game and 28 points per game. So all around, nothing that really jumps off the page there, but that goes both ways. Nothing like noticeably incredible, but nothing bad either there.
Yeah, the only thing that really jumps off the page to me, just looking at their raw stats, is 57 total red zone attempts. Like, they are good at getting to the red zone. It's just the touchdown rate being at 65% means that they're not the greatest at sort of capitalizing. And I would love to see splits in conference play. I could theoretically do that, but there are only so many hours of my day, and I also don't really want to. So it's one of those things that I would love to have if someone else did it for me. But yeah, they do get to the red zone with a degree of consistency. But all in all, they're just an average offense. And a lot of that sort of comes down to one human being, but we'll talk about them later. And now we can just talk a little bit more about the true offensive scheming of this team. And this is sort of where I think the K-State comps come into play.
Yeah. They're a spread team, but that's by necessity. A lot of their tight ends, by most of them, got hurt this year. They run a lot of RPO, where the main route is a player leaking out into the flats, the opposite way of the run. Because of how their RPO game works, they're overwhelmingly a zone running team, specifically a lot of inside zone split, which if you've ever played college football 25 or Madden, there's a probably 100% chance that you have at least heard of what that is.
Yeah. And the funny thing about their tight end room, so full disclosure, the games that we watched for this evaluation were Maryland, Illinois, and Michigan State. Up against Illinois, I think they were dressing a defensive tackle with number 86 to play tight end. That's how dead they were. And it was hilarious because 86 was, whoever this man was quite clearly not a tight end because he was a square. And Rutgers has two squares. Their other is their nose tackle. And you will know number 55 when you see him, not because of his number, but also because he is a square bear. But that they really do sort of run that spread power scheme, not spread power, but that sort of spread zone scheme that, I mean, the major modification is just the zone running. I mean, Bill Snyder was known for the spread power offense that he had in his early years before he decided that he was just going to be a power offense with some innovative tweaks. But it's a lot of RPO, and it's sort of that blending of philosophies, but not in the Arizona State way where I think it's really, really cool. It's more just blending of philosophies where you're like, yep, I can see what your offense is trying to do. That's about all I got there.
Yeah. And on the rest of their passing game, it's either short stuff or a moving pocket. Most of the time, only half of the field is a passing threat. They run the formation of many names, the clown car quarterback sneak, the booty blast, the Cro-Magnon, as I've referred to it in the past.
Brotherly shove.
The brotherly shove. I run that a lot. And short yardage. The Dana Dimmel play, rest in peace. It's the one that, if you're on Twitter, you've probably seen posted a lot, and people saying they want K-State to line up in that formation. Understandably, because it's really effective if you know how to do what that is. But
it's just a rugby scrum, basically.
And then they have a turbo set for third down short as well that they are able to use too.
Yeah, which I think that last part particularly is interesting because a lot of their turbo set isn't setting up for the Cro-Magnon booty blast. It is I couldn't finish that sentence with a straight face.
It might be the first time anybody has ever said those words.
In sequence. That's great. But a lot of their turbo set they sort of use to set up like quick slants and stuff like that. But they're not really a tempo team outside of those third down and shorts. And even then, that was mostly a wrinkle they had up against Illinois. So it might have been a look thing that they had up against Illinois, but it's something that they had installed. So you have to sort of watch for it. But their offense schematically, I get what they're trying to do. Sort of RPO, be really efficient, very similar to the Cincinnati offense under Scott Satterfield, except for I think Scott Satterfield's offense was focused a lot more on hitches as opposed to sort of the slide leak routes from the tight end. And you can debate the merits of that. The point is they both do the same thing, try to keep the quarterback efficient. But here's the funny part, and that this leads us into the notable players. Despite the entire offense being based on efficiency, their starting quarterback only has a sub 55% completion percentage, which is bad. It's not really great. Bad.
Not great.
But
better than L. Roberson in 2001, as we have learned.
True. 39%. Anyway, you get to talk about their quarterback first.
Yeah. Ethan Kalikmanis, he's a Minnesota transfer. He's been in college football a while. He's really the epitome of just an average college football quarterback. He really even has like the name to go with it. Ethan Kalikmanis just kind of sounds like a Big Ten Carson Kaufman. He just has the aura of him. It just makes sense if you've seen him play, because I've seen him play Minnesota as well, and he's just kind of like that.
He hasn't changed.
Yeah, he operates the offense with decent effectiveness, even though he's not a particularly accurate passer, which again a 55% completion rate. The most notable thing is really he does just kind of look beyond just being kind of a generic quarterback. He does also kind of seem like a early 2000s quarterback because everything about him is kind of robotic and borderline unnatural. So he's, I don't know, we're kind of roasting him right now, but like he's not bad. Like he's not a bad quarterback.
No.
Yeah, you got a decent touchdown interception, actually a pretty good one, 17 touchdowns to 6 picks this year, which is pretty good. He's got 233 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground as well. So, I mean, he's a solid quarterback that can get things done. We're just saying that we've played Shedeur Sanders this year, and Shedeur Sanders is a lot better than Nathan Kalikmanis. But we've also seen Alan Bowman this year, and he is definitely not anywhere near as bad as Alan Bowman.
God, no. Yeah,
so he's not the best and also not the worst that we've
had a severe allergic reaction whenever you said Alan Bowman.
Luckily, he cannot hurt you anymore. He is declaring for the draft. You can't see, I did some air quotes there, but he will be an excellent used car salesman here in the next few months.
Future high school football head coach Alan Bowman. But yeah, Kalikmanis is, despite he's just not a particularly accurate passer, but despite that, he is very good at taking care of the ball. He just doesn't throw too many interceptions. And the downside of that is there are two sides to this coin here. You look at his completion percentage and you're like, that's not very good. And then you look at his drop percentage, the receiver's drop percentage, which is hovering about 10 or 11%, which is also really bad. So you think, he's probably a fine passer, but the receivers are just letting him down. No, that's him throwing hospital passes. That is, if he thinks the guy is open, he's letting that thing. If you're one-on-one, he is throwing you this pill. And the problem is that sometimes results in hospital passes being thrown. So I think that is his completion percentage, should it be better than 55%? Probably, but it shouldn't elevate to anything past like 59 to 60%. And the drop percentage should probably be cut in half to like 5%. But despite all of that, he's not a terrible quarterback. He's perfectly serviceable, despite the fact that there were times, full disclosure, there were times that I was watching, complete aside, there were times that I was watching the Rutgers film and I would completely miss a play because Ethan Kaliakmanis was just doing something weird. He will hand the ball off and he will like still run like 5 yards with his hands like at his face mask. Where normally you have a handoff, quarterback will run the other way, like a normal human being. No, Ethan Kaliakmanis is acting like he is eating a Subway sandwich whenever he's rolling out away from the handoff. And yes, I am roasting him. But
I also kind of was too.
Yeah.
You threw me in that, so.
It comes from a place of love. Not really, but it
doesn't come from a place of hate, I suppose, at minimum.
It comes from a place of just general amusement, I suppose.
Neutrality at worst, but
but that leads us to the next notable player, who's really he's the reason this offense is even average.
Yeah, and that's Kyle Monangai, the running back. He's going to be one of the better backs that K-State has seen all year. A large part of that is that he's got a very complete skill set, but it's also telling that he's going to be one of the better running backs that K-State sees this year because K-State plays in the Big 12, and there's a lot of really, really good running backs in the Big 12, particularly this year. I mean, we had to see Ollie Gordon, we had to see Devin Neal, just to name a couple off the top of the head, Cam Scadaboo as well. Like there's some really quality running backs in this league, and Kyle Monangai is considered to be a draft prospect as well. I think he's kind of like a fringe top 10 running back. About is where he's considered.
Yeah.
Which on that note, there's been some like scuttlebutt that he might declare early, and if he did, he might opt out. But there's nothing conclusive on that at all. So I'm just going to act like he's playing in this game. I kind of hope that he does because it'll make for probably a more interesting game, if nothing else.
No. I don't want him to play. I want this game to be a blowout.
That's true. I do not want to play them close. That is for sure. I want revenge for the 06 Texas Bowl because that made me very sad. Also, we had to get NFL Network to watch that game as well. But Monangai, he has decent speed and power, but he's very elite in his vision and ability to hold on to the ball. He does not fumble very often at all, and he very rarely is not hitting the right hole as it is available to him in his zone running scheme. He remarkably intelligent and disciplined running back, which just goes a really long way. And throw in some pretty decent athletic traits as well, and that makes a running back that is absolutely dangerous and can hurt you.
Yeah, and he's the opposite of a dancer, but he's also not the 2 yards in a cloud of dust runner. I feel like characterizing him as either would be horribly dishonest because he's hitting the right hole, and every time he does, it's like 3-5 yard gain. And he's not going to lose you yards every time that you hand him the ball. He's not going to lose you yards. He's not going to lose you possessions. Those are the two of the most important things that a running back could have. And he has both of those down in spades. Is he strictly the most explosive running back that K-State has seen this year? No. That probably belongs to either Ollie Gordon or I'll give it to Devin Neal. I'll give it to Devin Neal, although Cam Scadaboo is definitely deserving of a mention there. But Monangai, he's just so consistent in a way that you don't see much of when you have these college running backs coming from an offense that's just kind of okay. And he has just been the model of consistency his entire career, and that's why he's going to be a draft pick. And that is why the path for Rutgers winning this game is on the back of Kyle Monangai.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. If Rutgers wants to win, it has to be through Kyle Guy. But there's still some notable players, though, on offense. Another one is a wide receiver by the name of Ian Strong. While he's not the leading receiver on the team, he's probably the most threatening because he can really just dunk on people with his frame. He is really good at tracking the ball in the air and times his leaps really, really well. His biggest weakness is that he does rely on his size a lot more than anything else, and is really just not a technician at all. So he, I always when I think of contested catch merchants, I just automatically think of like 2010's Baylor receivers,
Yep.
because that I just remembered I hated every single like tall athletic Baylor receiver because we'd always get mossed at least once whenever we played Baylor.
It's probably going to happen again. I hate to say it, it's probably going to happen again.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with Ian Strong, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't have anything substantive to add other than tall jump ball receiver who, whereas some receivers are scalpels, he is the hammer.
Yeah, and he had a fairly decent year. 30 catches, 571 yards, 5 touchdowns. I mean, that's a good season. It's not an elite season or anything close to it, but that's like a solid year for a good receiver in a Power 5 conference, particularly with his skill set. He's definitely going to be someone to keep an eye on.
Yeah, but that leads us to the final offensive piece here.
Yeah, the last one, and certainly not the least in terms of skill or size, is Holland Pierce. He's an offensive tackle, and he is an absolute monster. He is 6'8" and 350 plus pounds, and he exists exclusively to be a tree stump that has arms and keeps you from getting to Ethan Kalikmanis. And he's very good at that, actually. He very rarely allows himself to get beat with power. I imagine he more often than not just holds out one arm to keep defensive ends at bay.
You would be correct.
They just flail their arms and just can't reach him, if I had to guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
And he just manhandles people when he gets the opportunity. His only downside is that his frame makes him a little bit lumbering in the zone game. I mean, 6'8", 350 makes you great in a lot of ways, but like you can't be great at absolutely everything unless you're just a freak of nature. So it's easier to go around him in the zone running game, but even then, he can still surprise you. And if he's able to get in front of you, particularly if he's able to get his hands on you, you're probably not winning the rep, particularly if he's got a head of steam. Because, I mean, this is a guy that can just bury you really easily. He's incredibly strong and has the size to go with it, so you can really negate a lot of strength from your side.
Yeah, and I think I like that you use the word bury because he's pretty much the only consistent part of this offensive line, and that's because they're allowing a 31% pressure rate. Very few of that comes from Holland Pierce, however, and it's just because he's just really difficult to run through. And if you ask any defensive line coach or even most offensive line coaches, that you use your power as a pass rusher. That is, your power is what sets everything else up. And you can be as flashy a technician as you want, and that's going to get you some results. But if you can't just run through a guy and force the guy into the quarterback's lap, you're not going to be a particularly great pass rusher. The converse of that, or rather the inverse of that, is if you don't allow yourself to get moved, you're just by nature going to be a better pass blocking tackle. And that's what Holland Pierce has in spades. I mean, he's just big, and he's not a technical liability, which is pretty much all he needs to be in order to be a pretty solid offensive tackle in this scheme. So all in all, The offense has a schematic identity, but it's heavily reliant on one player, and not a lot about the offense is going to flash, I suppose to say. They're going to be a team that's going to beat you by virtue of ball control and consistency. They're not going to splash play you to death.
Yeah. When we describe this Rutgers offense, we use a lot of the same buzzwords and stereotypes that commentators have been using to describe K-State offenses for like the last 15 years, because they probably just watched a single Bill Snyder game and wrote down disciplined, consistent, don't beat themselves, lunch pail, and just cycled those among their colleagues and have been using the exact same buzzword since then. But it is actually pretty true for this Rutgers team. And yeah, they're just not a flashy offense really for the most part. And part of that, I guess, is there aren't a ton of Big Ten teams that you would call flashy. I suppose the Rutgers definitely not one of them. They're still a program that's trying to build something because they had a long way to go. They're still getting better. They're much better than they were. But yeah, they're still on the way up.
Yeah. And that leads us to sort of talk about their defense, which, I mean, it's fine. I think is probably the best way to describe their defense. That's really the TLD. Whereas, you have the basics of the offense are, they have a schematic identity in terms of zone split schemes and a lot of RPO and being efficient. The defense is, they're there. They're fine.
Yeah. However, some say that they're a very big team. And some of that comes from they have to deal with the offensive juggernauts of Michigan State and Nebraska. Noted
football.
Yes. Noted incredible offenses. So their defensive numbers, they may be a little bit inflated, just because of the offensive offenses that they deal with. Particularly this year, they did kind of get a light schedule, to put it nicely. But they still are an above average scoring defense. They only give up about 24 points per game, which puts them at 56 in the nation. So that's a bit above average. That's pretty solid. Defensively, they're pretty good in the red zone as well. Only 78% of drives are ending in points, and 68% of those are touchdowns. That's only 37 attempts as well. But their biggest weakness is that they are not great at making big plays on defense, which is to say, havoc rate is, I think, kind of the number that gets, or the buzzword that's used for this stat. And so they don't turn over teams a lot. They don't get a lot of sacks. They're outside the top 100 in both of those categories, which, in terms of defensive success, those are two of the biggest ways that you can turn a game on its head, is mess with the field position and steal possession. Rutgers not the best at either of those.
No, and I think that's sort of what makes their defense so difficult to sort of say anything about, because there are no lazy ways to sort of describe their defense, which, I mean, there are a lot of lazy ways to describe defenses or offenses that are good enough, but still mostly incorrect. There's no bubble that you can sort of put this Rutgers defense into, because they're not a bend but don't break unit, because they don't allow that many red zone possessions. They're not a unit that's going to make a bunch of splash plays on defense, so their red zone numbers are going to be deflated there. They're just a defense that sort of shows up, does their job, and doesn't give up a lot of points. There's no definitive way to really describe that other than, yes, that is indeed a defense. But now we can talk about their scheme.
Yeah, schematically, they kind of base in a 4-2 hybrid that we've seen from pretty much everyone. Uh, excuse me. They seem to base in a 4-2 hybrid that we've seen from literally everyone that we've seen outside of KU and Arizona State. And they're actually willing to play 4-3 at times, which is pretty unusual in modern college football. I don't even know if they offer that formation anymore in Madden or College Football 25. uh, they do have a slight preference for man coverage, and that's probably because they like to blitz. But they've been weirdly off at getting play calls in on defense this year, even against teams that aren't running tempo, which I'm not really sure what that's all about. But I guess maybe they just haven't adjusted well to the helmet comm system, something. But we just haven't. That's not something that we've really had to worry about too much this year because we haven't encountered really any teams that have communication issues, at least to the extent that they're noticeable. But that's something to at least keep an eye on.
Yeah, and as for what their 4-2 or 4-3 is, they are going to they are the first team that we've seen the entire year that's willing to sort of spread out their defensive ends to a true pass rush set to where they are lining up as 7 or 9 techniques, which is outside shoulder of the tackle and basically in outer space, respectfully. But it really is the communication that messes with me the most, because they do base in man coverage, mostly again because of their blitzing, and that's obviously not a base thing, but whatever. They do play a lot of man coverage, specifically a lot of single high man coverage. So I guess you could say that whenever they have those communication issues, it's just trying to get the blitz in. But even it's just sort of strange how such a well-coached team, because this is a Rutgers team that above all else is very well coached by Greg Schiano, that it's just sort of a weird thing that has happened probably about 3 or 4 times a game, and it's noticeable. Because I fully believe that every team probably deals with that 2 or 3 times a game, almost certainly. But most of the time, it's just not noticeable. This one is very noticeable because you do get guys looking to the sideline and starting that half tick late, sometimes even that full second late. That like, well, congratulations, this is now an 11-on-6 football game. Have fun. But yeah, the defense is all right. Like I keep saying, that they're just fine, and schematically they don't throw anything major at you outside of some elaborate blitz schemes where they are going to loop the linebackers. But that sort of leads to the notable players, of which there are 2.
Yeah, we start with Daryl Jabome. He's a linebacker. Stylistically, he's a throwback to the linebackers of the 90s. Just gets a ton of tackles. He's got over 100, and that's really the main notable part of his game. He cleans up messes. And the high tackle count middle linebacker, that is not as common nowadays. I mean, they still get plenty of tackles, but we're seeing more and more help from the defensive back end in that department, and also just less of an emphasis on just having your Mike linebacker end up with like 150 tackles a year, a la Blake Martinez.
God, that man got, say what you will, that man got his superstar dev trait every single Madden. But yeah, I think it's Jabome is my guess. But
I believe
it. He's a tackler. He's a solid tackler as well. He doesn't miss a whole lot in the way of tackles, but by virtue of him fulfilling that 1990s linebacker stereotype, is that man is going to get himself into the trash anytime that there's a slightly credible threat of play action. And it's just sort of that aggressive hitting, tackling middle linebacker that you saw a lot. You don't see much of nowadays. So he really is sort of a throwback to an era since past. But What's not a throwback is their outside corner, who he's a perfectly fine outside corner with one exceptional trait.
Yeah, he absolutely loves run defense. He is a rare true outside corner that absolutely loves run defense. He's still got decent coverage ability. You know, like sometimes when you get a reputation as a run defending corner, people just assume that you're not good at coverage. But no, he's still decent at coverage. But he's a great force player and truly loves run defense. Now lines up his PFF grade. He's the highest graded run defender on Rutgers' entire defense, and it's by a lot. Actually, he is. I'm about 12 and a half points better rated than the next closest run defender. That's some guy that's only played in 6 games. So Eric Rogers, 89 run defense grade, PFF. So he has earned every bit of that reputation as a willing, able, and enthusiastic run defender.
He plays outside corner like a safety, but like a good safety that's also able to cover. And that is the biggest compliment that I could possibly give him. But that, all in all, before we talk about, our predictions for the game, I do think that it is prudent to talk about the K-State side of things going into. So that the Rutgers part of this preview is more or less done until we do the wrap-up part of it. But K-State, for the first time in a while, I believe, has actually released a depth chart, which is exciting to see. And, there are a few areas that aren't really any surprises. I don't think the receivers room has any major surprises other than the arrival of Jacques Spradley Demps on the 2 line for one of the receiver spots. But I think the most interesting parts, at least we'll start with the offense, obviously. It really comes in the tackle positions as well as the running backs.
Yeah, Andrew Langang is getting the nod at right tackle to fill the spot of Carver Willis, which was vacated by his entry into the transfer portal.
And subsequent commitment to Washington.
That's Washington, which is an interesting spot to end up and land in so quickly. But Langang, he was one of the first kind of major recruiting victories that the staff was able to get against Power 5 competition, because I think it was between us, Stanford, and Minnesota for Langang. And that was kind of back in that time when we just kind of didn't really like we were still in that post Bill Snyder era, where it's like if another Power 5 school offers, then they are not coming to K-State unless it's an in-state guy and unless the other school is KU. But Langang is getting the nod at right tackle, and arguably, more interestingly, maybe not, but I'd say it's at least arguable, is Gus Hawkins making his way onto the depth chart at left tackle, where Kilty is still listed as the starter. Jackson Fulmer is the backup, but there's an or between Fulmer and Gus Hawkins, the true freshman and former 4-star recruit. Somebody that, if you listen to our recruiting episodes, Ace and I have been very, 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 very high on for a very long time. And I'm already here cracking the depth chart for the bowl game as a true freshman. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of him. Hopefully the game script warrants getting Gus Hopkins out into the field, because I'm really excited about his potential. I'm really excited to see him on the depth chart.
Yeah, the other thing is Jackson Fulmer at tackle is just interesting. I think we've seen it throughout this entire season, but we spent basically the entire time that, he's a guard. But granted, he was in the same class as Clem and Pastore. So
yeah, I was fully convinced that Fulmer was going to be a guard. I still think he should be, honestly, but neither here nor there, I suppose. But it's definitely interesting to see him there. Kind of the same deal a little bit with Drake Beckwith, who's listed as the backup right tackle. I kind of thought he was going to be a guard, although he makes more sense like at tackle than Fulmer, I think, because he does at least have the frame to kind of go in between. I think he's got longer arms. Fulmer, to me, always felt like a pure guard. So I'm always a little bit surprised seeing him listed at left tackle.
And I think Pastore's probably hurt because that's been the story with him.
Yeah, almost certainly the case with Pastore, or else I think he would probably be the penciled-in starter right tackle, and this depth chart would be even less interesting because Pastore we've seen plenty of, but probably hurt if we aren't seeing him.
Yeah. But outside of that, I think the only other notable room is the running back room because DJ Giddens did, or at least on the offensive side of the ball, DJ Giddens did declare for the NFL draft early. He was opting out of the bowl. So this is the Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson show. Now, if you're like me, you had a little bit of a heart attack looking at the at the depth chart because Dylan Edwards is listed at RB1, but immediately under him is Devon Rice. And this is not Devon Rice disrespect, mind you. Devon Rice is still a very good player. But for a moment, I had a heart attack because I thought Joe Jackson just like wasn't on the 2 line. No, he's listed on the 1 line of a different running back position, which, okay.
Yeah. It feels a little arbitrary to me to do that. I'd imagine it's there's a few different benefits, I guess, that it brings. The first one, and I guess it's a more vain interpretation, is that it allows the coaches to put more names on there to make more guys happy that they are showing up on the 2 deep. That's the immediate obvious benefit, I think. But another thing is it also may actually be kind of legitimate in that they are like those 2 spots on the depth chart are 2 different types of running back. Dylan Edwards and Devon Rice are pretty different from Joe Jackson and JB Price. So
yeah, the Rice and Price connection. That's going to get us in 2 years, dude. If we're still doing the show in 2 years, that's going to kill us.
I keep wanting to call him John Price because that's what he was when we were talking about him as a recruit, but he's JB now.
Yeah.
So
it's still technically correct because it's a hyphenated name, but still. Dead naming JB.
But Jaquise Bradley-Demps, I'm also happy to see make it onto the 2 deep. I don't think we mentioned it in our Cincinnati recap, but he did actually see the field at the end of that game. He played, I think, like 3 snaps. I think it was the 3 Evan Cantu handoffs. He was on the field for that, which I think is maybe the first offensive snaps he's gotten all year. But that was another guy that we were pretty high on as a recruit. Really, both of our receivers that we got in that last class, I thought were pretty good. But hoping to maybe see a bit of a breakout for Jaquise Bradley-Demps because I think he's a supremely talented wide receiver.
Yeah, I agree. So that's the offensive side of the ball. The defense, I mean, most of what you would notice comes down to 3 extremely scary time reads, and then the rest is normal. DNs are both normal. Defensive tackle is perfectly normal. Sam linebacker is Des Purnell or Strubot. Good God, Tyson Struber made a depth chart.
Yeah, definitely a little surprising to catch his name on the depth chart. But with the departure of Cam Salas to the transfer portal, next man up.
Yeah, and then it gets even scarier because the middle linebacker has exactly 1 person listed that is also not a starter, and that is Austin Romaine, followed by Austin Moore.
Yeah, it's pretty thin there in the middle of the defense.
Yeah, and then Will is normal. It's Austin Moore, RVW, and Zach Wittenberg. Yeah. And then corner, Jacob Parrish also declared for the draft early and opted out. So the starting corners are Justice James and Keenan Garber. I like Justice James.
Zayshawn Rich. Yeah, he's probably going to be first guy off the bench. Donovan McIntosh makes onto the 2 deep as well. So a redshirt freshman and a true freshman. Both guys that we were high on, but both for wildly different reasons making it on. Though Zayshawn Rich, his ascent has been pretty unexpected, I think. Because, I mean, we liked him, but we were both of the opinion that he would need some time in the oven because he was just a unbelievably unrefined prospect. And it seems that he's decided to make us look like fools, as have many other cornerback prospects in the past. But Zayshawn Rich working his way into the fold pretty quickly here, which, I mean, we saw him play pretty meaningful snaps throughout the season anyways, especially post-Colorado.
Yeah. I mean, he even got some run during the Colorado game.
Anyways, yeah.
This is where I think if Kenigel Thomas wasn't hurt, he would probably crack the 2 deep here. But I think he had shoulder surgery before the season.
Yeah, which he was seeing the field quite a bit as a true freshman, but then he gets hurt and ends up using his red shirt anyways. So not too different, I guess.
Yeah, but the starting corner, full disclosure, I would feel better about the starting corner combo being Justice James and Donovan McIntosh, even though we haven't seen too much of Donnie this entire season. I feel like Donnie, just out of high school, was sort of a known commodity where you knew he was going to be an outside corner who was not going to get beat deep by virtue of he's just going to push the person out of bounds. That was Donovan McIntosh's skill set. But I do like Rich. I'm a big fan of Rich. I feel like they're missing Kenigel. And, Keenan Garber on the one line. Congratulations, buddy. Speaking of congratulations, buddy, the Jack safety room. I miss you, Colby McAllister, already because
yeah, Jordan Riley getting the start at Jack safety, and then the namesake of the position, not actually, but Jack Fabris, his on the 2 line there, which talk about a mixed bag. That is Jack Fabris, because he's had some of the most impactful plays of the entire season, some of the biggest plays of the entire season, both positive and negative. So hopefully he was able to put out a good performance in the bowl game. I imagine we'll be needing him a decent amount in this one.
Yeah. Anyway. So now that we've gone over what K-State is bringing and what K-State is working with, now I think it's best to go into – I feel like that's just the stories to watch going into this game, with one exception, and that this is, to me, is it to the staff? Almost certainly not. And is it to Chris Kleiman? Almost certainly not. This is audition part 4 for Connor Riley. He did well in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. He did well at the beginning of the season and then had one of the worst offensive collapses in the country, going from the best offense in the Big 12 by yards and falling to 11th in, I think it was 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Stinky. I don't know what to expect. I hope good things, because I don't think that a change is going to be made. And we'll have this debate in an off-season episode of whether or not that's a good thing. I've given my thoughts in brief about it, but to me, this is a 4th part of the audition for Connor Riley.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what we get out of Connor Riley from this game as well, because honestly, I think if he does well in this game, I think what it may indicate more than anything is he's a guy that thrives with having extended periods of time to prepare, which may explain doing well early in the season and in bowl games. But I don't know, that it also may indicate nothing at all, and I may just be reading into it too much. But I too would like him to have a good game as a play caller, because if he does, then I'd probably be happy. That's actually it. That's the main reason.
Happiness is on the line here from the Aggieville Alleycats. But I think the other notable thing is just what young guys get on the field. And I think people downplay the result. And this is a point that Drew Galloway, shout out KSO. We got to get that plug in for every episode. This is a point that Drew Galloway has made a lot, that bowl games from a fan base perspective may seem less meaningful because of the expanded college football playoff, but it is very important for momentum going into the next season and momentum with recruiting. But to me, and that's something to watch, but to me, it's always the best part of a bowl game is seeing what young guys show up and, decide. And even, I mean, it's the unexpected young guys. So like JSD at this point, I think would probably be the only like unexpected young guy, but I am still excited to see Joe Jackson play because damn it, I've been excited to see Joe Jackson play since he got here.
Yeah. The few bits of Joe Jackson that we've gotten have been, I think, very fun. And I think Joe Jackson could end up being a kind of a fan favorite type of guy, depending on how his career goes. Because I think he runs with such an intensity. I think that it's just really easy to like him. And I'm really hoping that he's able to keep that up because he does kind of have a Pacheco style run where he runs angry and
runs like he's mad at the floor.
Yeah, and that is a great quality for a running back to have. They just need to be angry at everybody all the time. Like if there's one position that needs to manufacture disrespect constantly, like it probably should be running backs. Then maybe corners, but corners already do that. But running backs, it's like it seems like they thrive off of negativity.
Why do you think Saquon Barkley suddenly started doing exponentially better whenever people started the running backs don't matter conversation?
Yeah, exactly right. So that's something to look out for sure is the young guys, who we see if anybody stands out. Which, and talking about Joe Jackson, I also am hopeful that we'll get some Devon Rice, maybe a bigger sample size in this game. Not huge, I'd imagine, unless it's garbage time and we may get a few more, but just a carry or two and some meaningful moments because he's only had one carry this year and it was a garbage time carry against Cincy, so it barely counts. But he's been returning kicks here and there. So it's clear there's some trust in him. So I'm curious to see what we can get out of him. And of course, Gus Hawkins making his way onto the depth chart is very exciting.
Yep. So Connor, it's the moment everyone's been waiting for. K-State wins if, K-State loses if, and what is your official projection?
I think K-State's going to win this game if they're able to contain Kyle Monangai and if they take care of the football and offense. I think the easiest way to lose this game would be to give Rutgers more chances on offense. And that's just the absolute last thing that we need to do. So we need to take care of the football. And then offensively, Rutgers is probably going to be going through Kyle Monangai for the most part. So that's a major issue that we need to keep track of. We can't let him run all over us. And for the most part this season, we've done a pretty decent job at containing prolific running backs. Ollie Gordon didn't do too well against us. Devin Neal was pedestrian against us. Even Cam Scadaboo wasn't that great against us. There was other areas Arizona State got us. But to absolutely contain the Rutgers running game and do not turn the ball over. I know those are kind of general, but I really think it's that simple for this game. I think those are the biggest things we need to focus on.
Yeah. To me, it's going to come down to stay out. K-State just needs to stay out of their own way, more or less, because this is one of the rare teams, and I hate to go back to this narrative because I do think this narrative is lazy and has been dead for quite some time. But Rutgers is not going to be able to just strictly out-talent K-State. And the way that a less talented team beats a more talented team is by capitalizing on mistakes and winning in the margins, especially with special teams. So I think that the key to K-State winning this game is just staying out of their own way and don't allow the Rutgers special teams to be what K-State special teams were stereotypically for the past 20 years, even further than that. But to me, that is the winning formula, is just don't get in your own way. But to me, K-State loses this game if the exact inverse happens. If they get in their own way, if Rutgers is able to generate those rare turnovers, and if Rutgers is able to get in to the plus field position using their good special teams. And I think that on the same way that you need to stay out of your own way if you're K-State, you also can't afford to go into your shell. So if Rutgers is able to force K-State, and specifically Connor Riley, to go into a familiar shell of run the ball, pass for short of the sticks, and then punt, if they're able to get that into that rhythm, that is how Rutgers wins this game. And Connor, how are you feeling about that? And keep in mind that you're muted right now.
I think that, thank you for that, by the way.
No problem.
I think that the biggest thing that I worry about in this game is letting Rutgers make big special teams plays. Because we've said a few times in this episode that Rutgers will probably win this game in the margins. And K-State has had some special teams miscues late in the season, particularly in the field goal department and the process on that end, which for as much as people have panned Chris Tennant in the past, it's actually really not been his fault at all. In fact, Chris Tennant's actually been really great this year. So a big shout out to him. But we need to get things figured out on the special teams side before we face Rutgers, or at the very least, we need to find a way to mostly nullify it. Which one great way to do that is to not ever have to punt or kick field goals, just score a lot of touchdowns. Do that, and maybe since we're K-State, respond with some great special teams of our own. But at least if we want to get back to our roots, if we ever decide to do that. But yeah, I think that's the one of the easiest paths to victory for Rutgers. I say easy, but if they get some advantages in special teams, it makes winning a lot more realistic for Rutgers.
Yeah. So now it's the real moment that everyone's been waiting for, and that is the projections. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think that this is a Wildcat victory, and I think it's I don't want to say strictly comfortable one, because I do think that Rutgers is capable of making any game uncomfortable if you allow them to. But I still think the K-State wins this game. I'm going to go with a score of 31-17.
Similar score for me, 38-17. K-State wins this one.
Have any final notes before we sign off and leave these people to their Christmas weekends and also the near future?
College football season is just way too short. Always feels like it absolutely flies by whenever we're in it. But I mean, finishing 9-4, I mean, that'd be 2 straight seasons, finishing 9-4, and that give us 3 straight of 9 wins or more. So even though it was a very frustrating end to the season, 9-4 sounds a lot better to me than 8-5. So I'm really hopeful we're able to go out there and win and translate that to some momentum in the portal, because we've got some pretty hefty portal targets visiting.
Yeah, and 9-4 also feels a hell of a lot better than 8-5. But with that all being said, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggieVilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdward00.
I am at Connor Balthasar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store with the link found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. For come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.